For me, the Elgato Prompter has been one of the coolest and most game-changing pieces of equipment that I've added to my setup in recent memory. I talked all about that in my full review, and now, over 100 days later, I want to share my thoughts and experiences with you, along with addressing some of the issues I found with the prompter and some of the comments and questions that have popped up repeatedly in that original review. The whole spoiler here is that I absolutely love the prompter. Just like the full review and the other videos I've made about it, this is not sponsored. I'm just a person who ordered the prompter from a website, and that's my experience with it. I think that the Elgato Prompter is absolutely phenomenal at what it's made for, and a lot of the frustration that has popped up from other users seems to be when people are trying to use it in ways that it's not intended, which I'll talk about a little later on in the video. But the closest thing I could think about is how, like, a spoon is a terrible fork. It doesn't mean that the spoon is bad, but if you try to use it as a fork, you're gonna have some forking problems. And I don't know where a spork would fit in this analogy, but this is not a spork. This prompter is a spoon. That is a sentence that's never been said before. If you use it as it's intended and the way it's designed to be used, it's pretty freaking great. Forking great. And that's true for pretty much any product, but I think since teleprompters, especially with this one, are a lot more accessible now, a lot of people are using them for the first time and sort of encountering those workflow issues and those learning curves for the very first time. And most of the issues I've encountered myself or have heard about have less to do with this specific prompter and more to do with prompters in general, because there is a huge learning curve when it comes to learning how to use a prompter effectively, and it's a new piece of technology that you've got to kind of, get a handle on before it feels like a natural part of your setup. So as I said, my overall experience with the prompter has been awesome. Since getting it, I've used it on every video I've made for this channel, for my second channel, and for client projects. It has become an integral part of my workflow. My wife Heather also got a prompter for her office, and she specifically told me to tell you that she's had a great experience with it, has had no issues, but there was a learning curve with trying to figure out where to look on the prompter's screen because she was so used to staring directly at a camera's lens for so many years. And obviously if you're using this for a script or for a video call, it's a little easier to know exactly where to look. But if you're using it as a reference monitor or for a live stream where it's sort of just a computer display in front of you, it can sort of almost feel like you don't know where to look. I have found that the screen is small enough that unless it's right up against your face, it kind of doesn't matter where you look because it's going to look like you're looking at the camera. But if you're used to not using a prompter and just staring directly at a camera's lens, it's going to feel a little weird when you put a prompter, any prompter, in front of your camera. And that's something that's not specific to this prompter, but it's something that's true with just using a teleprompter in general. So Heather told me to tell you about those teleprompter experiences. And for me, I use the prompter for different things at different times. I do use it for scripts, and I love using it with the Elgato pedal, which is at my foot right now, so I can scan through the scripts or let it autoplay or do whatever it might be. It's kind of cool, unless I stomp the pedal. And then you can hear that in the recording, so I've sort of had to learn to use a light touch with the pedal. But that's been great. So the Stream Deck pedal, which is under my desk, I did a whole video about that. I think it's one of the most underrated accessories out there. It's really fun to use with the prompter because it makes things super easy, and I don't have to deal with any like janky Bluetooth remotes or apps or anything like that. It's just, I push pedals with my feet. You could also program it with a Stream Deck. I could also just use my mouse and then, let's see, I could put the pointer over here and then I can scroll through my script with my mouse. This is all using the Elgato Camera Hub software. You could also just put anything else on here. If I switch it over to display mode, then I could just take whatever I want. Like for example, I have bullet point outlines for this video I'm recording right now. I could just put the Notes app right here, and now I could just read off of that if I wanted to. So you have all of that flexibility, and this right here has been what's very cool to me, is being able to switch not just from a script with traditional prompter text, but also then being able to just use it as an additional display. This is how you'd use it for video calls, remote podcasts, just a reference monitor, whatever it might be, because then I can take my eCam window. Oh no, I lost my eCam window there. I can take my eCam window, put that on here, and now if the prompter were on the camera, I can just see what I'm recording. You can also do both. So I can turn it to text mode and then turn down the opacity, and now this display is right behind it. So you can overlay your script on top of a confidence monitor, a reference monitor, however you're using it. There's quite a lot of versatility just built right into this thing. So as I was saying, I do use the prompter for different things at different times. I do use it for scripts, especially for client projects where things need to be more specifically word for word. For my own projects, a lot of times I just use it to have bullet points up on screen to just sort of keep me on track, and I remember as long as I've addressed all these points, I've covered pretty much everything I need to cover. But again, being able to switch it over to just a regular display with the push of a button means then I can use this as a reference monitor or for video calls, remote podcasting. It's been so awesome if I'm doing anything that involves talking to somebody else, being able to stare directly at them and see them and just have that one-on-one thing. It has changed. I said this in the full review, but it has changed how I feel about video calls and remote meetings and stuff. It's made them so much more enjoyable just because I can actually see the person instead of just a camera lens and the person slightly off to the side over there. But again, just because it's great does not mean there's not a learning curve. There are some things to get used to with using a prompter. In addition to just learning how to look at a prompter and read from a prompter, that's something that takes a lot of practice and experience. It is going to change your workflow a little bit. I have found that this one does change the exposure of my camera. I think I could probably just hold it up to the camera and show you. There we go. If you're looking at me through here, you can sort of see the exposure here is a little bit darker than the exposure out here. And I don't know if the color's a little different. The colors I think are a little different. They're like a little more saturated and just a little different. So it does change the color and exposure of your camera a little bit. But again, that's gonna be true for any prompter you use because you're putting a piece of specialized glass and in this case, another light source, this display right here, which especially when it's on the display mode, this is pretty bright. So you're taking specialized glass and a light source and now you're sticking that in front of your camera's lens. It's going to affect the image quality. And in this case, I use a Final Cut Pro preset that I made years ago to sort of like adjust the colors and things on my videos. I still use that preset. I just know that when I'm using the prompter, I kind of need to change the exposure and sometimes the white balance just a little bit. I usually boost the exposure a little bit and then make the white balance like a couple hundred degrees cooler and it looks pretty much the same as it always has. Now, as I said in my full review, the display is super bright. In fact, it's probably too bright because when you do have it up against your lens, sometimes you can get this glare, especially if you have a bright white screen on here. If I take this and I were to put it in front of here, you can even kind of see right now, actually, there's sort of like a haze that's happening around here. If I switch this to text, that should go away because now we have a black background and now I have the display with the light background and you can see the sort of haze and the glare there. But if I take my brightness and I turn that down a little bit, then it goes away and there's less of a difference. Right now I have the text on screen. Right now I have the display on screen. So if I have this pumping at full brightness, it's going to create some glare on the image. But if I just turn that brightness down just a little bit, right now I have it at 60%, which is still plenty bright for me to see, but it is something to be aware of because for a lot of people that glare became a glaring issue when they set up their prompter and everything looked kind of like hazy and weird and bright. So changing the brightness helps. If you're just using the text with its black background and white text, it's not an issue. If you want to use the display to put up a script, like maybe it's a Notes app or a Google Doc, if you just do what I did here and just have it set to dark mode, where it's a darker background, it will also solve the problem. But even though this display is probably brighter than it needs to be, I would rather have that than have it be too dim. I'd rather be able to just turn it down than turn it up as full as it will go and have it not be bright enough and now I can't do anything about it. Also, as you could kind of see a moment ago, and if you watched any of my other videos, I've been using the prompter hanging off of the front of my camera lens. I can't do it with this one because I don't have the adapter ring, but I've been sort of using it like this rather than using a platform or anything. And I was very nervous about doing that at first because I didn't want to put all the weight on the camera's lens mount. This prompter is super duper lightweight, and now that it's been months of using it on my camera lens, I had no issues at all. And it's super flexible because when I'm using it on my camera in the studio, it can be like this, but then when I want to take my camera and film B-roll or use it for something else, I can just very easily slide the prompter off, set it on the desk, take the camera, and go. Now, a very important thing to keep in mind with the prompter is to only use it with the cable that it comes with or an equivalent cable, which, if you've never used something like this, you probably don't have an equivalent cable. It is USB-C, but it's incredibly high speed, so you can't use it with like probably any cables that you have normally unless you're using a lot of high-end capture cards or something along those lines. If you try to use this with a different cable, it either won't work or it won't work reliably and you're gonna have a whole bunch of problems. So many people who have brought up issues with the prompter to me. It turns out they were just using the wrong cable because they bought the prompter. It has a USB-C output input. They already had a USB-C cable coming out of their computer, so they just plugged that in and they experienced issues. You need to use the cable that comes with the prompter or an equivalent cable. And the other thing is to make sure you're plugging the prompter directly into your computer and not running it through a hub or anything like that. Even if you love your hub and you're married to your hubby over there, don't use it with this. Plug it directly into the back of your computer because that's also going to help prevent so many different issues from occurring. Now, even though the prompter is great, there's definitely room for improvement. So after using it for a significant chunk of time now, I definitely want to share with you some of the areas that I think the prompter could be improved. Really, the biggest area for improvement, which is also one of the prompter's biggest strengths, is the software. And what I mean by that is, this is like version 1 of the Camera Hub software that Elgato put out. So it can do a lot, like I've kind of showed you throughout this video, but it's also pretty limited, especially when it comes to wanting to work with more than one script at a time. You kind of can't. You sort of have to like paste your text in individually for each script and keep them. It's sort of frustrating if you're switching between scripts. It's also a little buggy if you unplug the prompter while it's connected and try to plug it back in. The software and the prompter sometimes they don't see each other again. So what you need to do if you unplug the prompter is completely quit the software application, plug the prompter back in, wait until it opens up as a display, and then launch the Camera Hub app again. And you'll see a little message about it's launching its video drivers or whatever it might be when it starts. And that means it's kicking in the prompter again. And then you can use all the controls. So if you find that the software is not controlling the prompter, like the brightness isn't adjustable or your Stream Deck pedal or something isn't making the script go, it's probably because they're not talking to each other and you need to shut them both down and then reconnect the prompter, relaunch the software. But the reason I'm a little hesitant to talk about software bugs is because this is still by far the best prompter software I've ever used, whether that's from consumer level prompters or professional studio prompters. The bar is really low because most of them are just so bad. They're just so bad. This one is so much more usable than anything else I found. That I like it a lot already, but there is a lot of room for improvement. My other criticism, and I'm not 100% sure how valid this is, has to do with the platform that comes with the prompter. So if you don't want to hang it off your camera lens, you can attach this platform to it and then set your camera here and then have it look through the prompter there, and then this would all go on your tripod. So the prompter's mounted on your tripod and then you attach your camera here. The problem, as I kind of showed in the video I made about how to connect any camera to the prompter, is this platform, you can kind of see it's plasticky and very bendable. So if you put a heavier camera like my Sony FX3 on here, especially with a decent lens, it starts to get sort of bendy and weird. I really don't think it's designed to be used with a camera like that, with a full-size, full-frame mirrorless camera or a cinema camera or anything. I think this is designed to be used more with webcams, with phones, with small mirrorless cameras, something like the Sony ZV-E10, something that's small, compact, and not too much beyond that size. But I'm not 100% sure if that's a valid complaint if you remember that this is a consumer product designed to be used with consumer level cameras, and my complaint is like, well, I can't put my cinema camera on there. Maybe it's just not designed for that. But it'd be cool if it was, or if they even sold another version of this that you could buy separately for heavier duty cameras. That would be cool too. And I talked about the display's brightness, but another area for improvement, which I think could be relatively simple through the Camera Hub software, is being able to adjust the display's color. Right now it's fine, but it definitely doesn't match my other display here. This is not supposed to be a super color accurate reference monitor. It's a less than $300 prompter. Like, this is a great display, all things considered. But if I were able to go in the software and change, the color temperature, or maybe some of the color settings a little bit to make it match my other monitor, at least a little bit more, that would just be sort of helpful. Right now, there's a very obvious shift when I move something from one monitor to the prompter. You can definitely see the color difference. Since the display does show up as another display on your computer settings, you can add color profiles to it and change it just like you would another display, but it's a little clunkier. You have to make a color profile. It'd be easier if I could just do that in the software with a few sliders. And the last thing I want to address in this long-term review are some of the comments and things that have popped up on my full review since I published it. Probably the two most common things that popped up are the price and the shipping times. First of all, price. All our budgets are different. This is a $280 teleprompter with a built-in display. This is absurdly affordable for what it can do and the fact that it comes with good software. In the past, when I've tried to set up studios and things using prompters that have built-in displays, the least expensive option without software included was $1,500. $280 is like the sales tax on those other prompters. Even now, because that was quite a few years ago, even now looking at prompters with built-in displays, the least expensive ones I can find are about $1,000, and they're pretty low-end prompters, and I don't know what their software options are. So it's either $280 or $1,000+ to get a prompter with a built-in display. And this is probably the biggest strength of the prompter. One cable to do everything with the prompter. I don't need other things. I don't need HDMI. I don't need a power supply. I just need this one high-speed USB cable and I'm good to go. So the price, I think, is incredibly fair for this prompter. And the other thing is shipping times that people talked about, because I think Elgato really underestimated how many people would want a teleprompter, and the shipping times got pushed like months and months in the future. I'm not connected with Elgato in any way. I have no idea how their global shipping logistics works. It's totally beyond my YouTuber pay grade, but it does seem like even if they are giving long-term dates that are far out, units are being shipped way ahead of schedule. Obviously, that's not something you can guarantee, but it seems like most people I know who have placed orders and it said it's going to be months in the future. Even my own was supposed to not come till January, and I got it in October. That's pretty cool. I totally understand the frustration with long-term shipping delays and things, but at a certain point, you kind of just got to bite the bullet, get your spot in line, and hope for the best. One of the other comments popped up, it kind of had to do with price, and it was people saying that for less money, you could just get a prompter that's just glass and metal, and you just put your phone or a tablet in it, and that's much simpler. And I totally disagree. Those prompters are cheaper. I've used them myself, but you have to use your phone or a tablet. And for me personally, I really dislike doing that. Even the best phone apps for prompting and scripts and stuff are kind of clunky to use. You have to deal with either a weird remote thing or constantly reaching over to readjust stuff and move things. I have found that when I used a prompter that relied on my phone or my tablet, what ended up happening was I just didn't use the prompter because it was a total pain in the butt. This, because it doesn't do that, I have literally used on every video except this one since I got it. The other issue with using the prompters that require to use a phone or a tablet is it's way harder, if not kind of impossible, to use the prompter for anything beyond scripting. So you can have all those script apps, but if you want to use it for video calls, if you want to use it as a display reference monitor, it becomes very difficult, if not near impossible, and super clunky. And this eliminates clunkiness out of the workflow. For me, at least it did. And that ties into the next comment that popped up a lot, which is that this is not portable enough because it needs to be connected to a computer. And so if you're trying to do something that's remote on location, you have to have a laptop or something connected to it. And that to me goes back to the intent behind the prompter and making sure that you're using it the way that it's intended. This is designed for home offices and small studios. If you're trying to put it in a huge broadcast production studio, it's really gonna look way too tiny on the camera that's super far away. If you're trying to use it on remote on location things where you need to be, filming stuff, walking down a street or something and reading a script, it's also not going to be ideal for that. That is where those smaller prompters where you can just pop your phone in or something and hang off your camera lens, that's where those are much better because you can easily use those on location. And again, all of this is just my personal experience. This is just a cool thing that I bought that I really like and I want to share it with you. If you find your setup or your workflow or your approach is similar to mine, this is probably a good thing to get. If your needs are different than mine, this might not be the thing to get. But speaking of things that are the thing to get thanked anyway, thank you to everyone who helps support my channel through Patreon and YouTube channel memberships. And if you haven't seen my full review of the Elgato Prompter, definitely check that out. Or if you want to learn how to mount any camera to the prompter, from a webcam to a full-on mirrorless cinema camera, I've also got you covered with this video right here.